All right, traders, this is Christian from Hertz Traffic and Trade Group, and this is your end of day recap for Monday, the 12th. Risk disclaimer in front of you: everything that we're going through here is for information purposes only, not giving any advice or recommendations. This video is for educational purposes only. So another grind higher for these indices today. We had SPY basically come into the session flat, maybe down like just slightly red for the session. Overnight session once again, Sunday night going into Monday morning, very, very quiet. And you could see we took care of business, I guess, today in terms of what the indices did today, up 40 basis points, just tacking on some more gains. The Qs were flat. They actually, had a little bit of a reversal. And not really a reversal, I shouldn't say that, but they were the leader in the overnight session and just didn't really add to much gains. They were flat over the session. Again, I'm always looking at this column here, percentage change versus open, just to kind of tell you what was bought, what was sold, what was interesting during the day, what was not interesting during the day. The small caps were one of those things that was just kind of stood out like a sore thumb to me in the overnight session. They were down about 0.5%. So, they actually came back quite nicely throughout the session. And that was actually, besides the Dow stocks, was the biggest gainer. So you see, I do have that highlighted as well. Interesting that maybe the Dow stocks lead a little bit here. I'll bring up that chart in just a second. The TLT bonds weren't an issue for this morning, but they gave back gains, right? They sold off through the session. That was a little bit useful, I would say, for the banks. And the VIX ended up down. When we look at sectors, before I get into, I'll look at the index charts in just a second. But the financials kind of stood out. They had the best performance. A little bit of a value rally today. Not much, right? Not much difference between value and growth today. But you could see value did lead. And when you look at the sectors, you got the financials up there. You got the steel names. You got I said financials, but banks also. You had some energy, metals up there too, and a couple of different smaller areas. Right, these areas are not going to come up too big in the S&P. But lithium stocks were absolutely on fire today, and the rare earths, which we talked a little bit about on Friday, I put that chart out pretty early in the day on Friday. They were hot again today too. So rare earths, lithium, so some material stocks, not your major big material stocks, but some of these other areas of the market did pretty well. Also, the semis. I want to talk a little bit about the semis. We're going to have some earnings reports that come up there. Before we get into any of that, let's just take a quick look at the S&P. Again, we're not really going to see too much. There's not much to super analyze here on the daily chart of the S&P. Right? I know some people like to do that, right? They like to draw a whole bunch of things in here. The bottom line is that we're holding above the 5-day moving average, right? Some people use like the 8, 9, 10 moving average. I use the 5 and the 20. Once we're above value like this, right? I don't use my indicators much, the MarketWebs. What I rely on once we're in price discovery is I tend to use some of the shorter term moving averages. And one of the ones that I always talk about a lot is this 5-period exponential moving average. Price is just staying above it, right? That just tells you where we are. We're following along in the uptrend. Right, so yes, we know that we're getting a little bit stretched here. We had that hiccup last week and a real nice recovery that after buyers stepped in, but we're just continuing to ascend higher here. So that's S&P. What I always talk about is the value area for the on the 1 hour chart. That gives a lot more information if you're trading a little bit more short term than just trading long term stuff. This gave a really nice signal last week. We broke into this just briefly, came out of it, retested, and then went. Notice you got a same thing going on again. This is important because this is a major pivot point for the week, right? Remember what these value areas are. Again, when I'm on the 1 hour chart, this is the value area for the week. Where are we deriving this value area from? Well, from last week's price action, price and volume, right? So we're using that to draw a value area based on last week's volume and price action, right? So that's what this does. It gives you a nice, roughly one standard deviation of support and resistance. Well, now what was resistance is now support, but it becomes very important, right? Price always consolidates around these levels and looks for areas that you know do have that support and resistance. So that's S&P. NASDAQ, I don't think that we even really need to look at the NASDAQ on the daily chart. You could see, a lot of consolidation here. Also, keep in mind last week, if you don't believe me, and we talked about this several times last week, but price fell right to the top of value, and it held beautifully last week. And then since then, it was up and to the right. Now the small caps are going to look a little bit different here. Right, so the small caps rallied all the way up to the top of value, right? So they're the one that's not behaving like the others right now. So interesting that there was a little bit of pressure in this. So we're kind of left right at this top of value pivot, which I think is going to probably dictate, where we go this week. Remember when the small caps tend to participate, the breath is stronger. You could see on the bottom left of your screen, not the strongest breath in the world, but really not too bad, not too weak either. If you want to look at the raw data in terms of the advancing versus declining, in the Dow you had 16 advancing names, 14 declining names. A little bit more skewed when you look at the S&P, 299 advancing, 202 declining, and the NASDAQ 1479 versus 1415 declining names. All right, so one other chart that I wanted to bring in the mix here in terms of the indices. Now, I don't have Dow futures and Thinkorswim, but I actually went along a little bit of the diamonds. I think this kind of sets up here a little bit, and I don't know, seems like a little bit of a logical transition to maybe some of the Dow stocks perform, step up to the plate a little bit, at least ahead of earnings. Right, Disney was a big mover today. A lot of people liked this price action a lot today. Notice, this was a big move for Disney, and it kind of just, to me, shows me that probably people a little bit underweight Disney, right? And when you get these types of moves like this, right? And by the way, look at the 1 hour VPOC being taken out last week and reversal, right? So I know some newer traders, whenever they see this, they're like, maybe there's a short squeeze going on, right? Well, Disney doesn't really have any much short interest. It's really the fact of, you have to remember, it's not just people have this fixated in their mind these days that it's short interest that causes these big moves. Sometimes it's just when funds are not positioned heavily in a name, right? You do know that over time, not over time, but the institutions are driving the market. They're always driving individual names, unless they're really, really small cap names, which we know message boards drive those. But for the bigger names, it's the institutions that drive them, and a lot of times they're just not positioned. And when they need to go ahead and buy, they could really, and when a bunch of them need to buy at once, they could really push a name, in a particular direction. So I would be mindful that we did take out this version point of control here. There's also one on the daily chart that is right up here. Again, there's not 100% guarantee that we stop at this version point of control, but a lot of times we do. All right, so that's Disney. That was definitely a name to talk about for the day. Dow stocks, those were important. Like UNH is doing very well. This name also reports. So again, remember, I'll talk a little bit about Virgin Galactic, but if you're asking questions about this name today, sorry, I give it to you straight in these videos. The trade is kind of over with, right? Remember, trading, buy the rumor, sell the news. I know what happens with these names. Sometimes retail investors fall in love with these names and they don't let loose of these names when they should, which is okay if you have like a long-term time horizon. But that means that you probably shouldn't be asking like 10 questions about the name today too, if you have a long-term time horizon. If you're a trader, then you could have sold it pre-market for a gain, or you could have just sold it a little bit last week, right? These moves, especially these momentum stocks, the majority of the move that happens in these things is buy the rumor, sell the news. Okay, so the stock to me is finished for now, right? That was the catalyst, this big test flight that everybody was going to be watching, anticipating. And what happens? Again, it's a little bit complicated because the company stole stock. sold stock today, but I think the stock was headed to go back to flat, if not down, if there was no stock offering, because that's just the principle in trading. It's one of those things that you have to get used to, right? So the reason why I'm talking about names like UNH, because look at what's happening here, right? This name reports towards the end of the week. Now, I think this name is going to put up great earnings, but if you could position into these things ahead of the results, right? So many younger or newer traders, they want to wait for what happens. They want to wait for the event, just like the the SPCE. They want to wait to see what happens. That's not how trading works, right? A lot of times it'll be a run into the event, right? And then, let's say, for example, and I don't know what UNH is going to report, but let's say they crush it on their earnings report. There might not be much of a reaction because it makes the move into earnings, right? So I've been talking about that. I talked about that all last week with the FANG stocks, right? What do the FANG stocks love to do? Looking a couple weeks out before earnings, they love to run into the earnings. Newer traders are going to be like, well, hey, I want to make sure that they're going to have good earnings, right? And then what happens is they have great earnings and the stock doesn't go anywhere. And some of these newer traders will be left scratching their head saying, I don't understand. They had a great earnings quarter. Why did they actually sell off? Well, because you have to look at the path of what happens going into earnings, right? That's just the way it works, okay? So now there will be some good earnings movers, both probably to the upside and to the downside. Many of which will happen when a name hasn't moved that much and a name crushes the earnings. Those are the ones that are really going to move, right? Like this one was a really good one today, right? INMD, wasn't slated to have earnings. They released preliminary results, and this is probably a name. Look at the volume. Right? It's one of the lesser talked about medical device companies, but look at how strong it is. Now, you could have said this thing ran a little bit into their number and they weren't supposed to report earnings till the end of the month, but so this was a surprise reaction. Right? Probably a surprise that they weren't supposed to release earnings for a couple weeks. So this is different. Right? But if a name goes absolutely vertical into the number, please do not expect, the name to rally hard after, even though it will be good results. If a huge move has happened prior to the number, it's going to be most likely the same trading principle. Buy the rumor, sell the news. All right, so again, I'm covering this like in just about every one of these daily videos because it's important. Right? Because last quarter, a lot of people were disappointed. They're like, I don't understand, right? This company had great earnings. Why are they selling off? Well, maybe they're just a little bit too highly valued, right? There was a great chart that Liz Ann Saunders put out this morning. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. I think I can get it fairly quickly. But she was talking about this morning. Nope. So where do I have it? This is one of the first things. Yeah, so like the price to sales ratio right now, it's very high right now. So going into earnings again, I think if you're looking to put on a lot of earnings trades, right, you might be a little bit disappointed. Why? Because the valuation is already very high. Now, I would be looking personally, and that's just me. I could be wrong. I'm just telling you what I'm doing. But if this was not, if the price evaluations were not that high, and there wasn't a lot of big moves, right? If the market was down, then I might be looking for more earnings type trades to put on. But being that we have this, right, where the price to sales ratio is very high for the Nasdaq, I don't think there's going to be much. I think you could actually maybe fade some moves. You could put on some like iron condors, right, where you're selling a call spread, selling a put spread, and you're just collecting the premium. Those are going to be more of the trades that I'm going to be concentrated on for earnings, given that a lot of names are up a lot, right? A lot of the popular names, quality names, are up a lot. So, keep that in mind. So I'm using this space SPCE example to let you know this is how trading works most of the time. All right, so what else was some of the movers? So a couple of things that I'm watching. Speaking of one name this is, by the way, this is a good example. This one, it could do something interesting because it really hasn't done that much. Now, Taiwan Semiconductor doesn't do a whole hell of a lot on earnings, but it has a chance, right? If they say something really nice on the earnings call, you could see, -1%, +1%, -2%, +2, +2. This is not a name that does that much on earnings day, but I think the chart looks pretty constructive, right? So I like this a lot, and I like what's going on in a few other names besides the Nvidia and the AMD. If you look at ASML, this name's almost back out to 52-week highs. Now I know this is an expensive stock, but of course you can buy fractional shares in most brokerage systems. Very, very nice. Lam Research saw some weekly call buying today. Maybe a little bit of positioning for Taiwan Semi. Also, most of these names are going to report in the next couple weeks too, so it could be a little bit of that too, right? That name does have to get into value. That level is going to be right around 630, so another $5 up. All right, so I thought that was interesting, and then of course this move was crazy today in the lithium stocks. Look at the breakout you've got going on here. Again, there's a reason why this is so gappy, by the way, is because it has a lot of international stocks that trade while the U.S. market is closed. So once we open, it's a little bit of a catch-up move, right? So if you look at LIT and the components, there are definitely some U.S. names in here. Albemarle is number one, but you could see there's a lot of Hong Kong stuff in here, or Chinese names that's in here. Hong Kong, yeah. SQM is another name in here, but you could look at some of these names. ALB just took out that VPOC and just kept on going. Very impressive move for Albemarle. SQM is another name. Right, that also took out a virgin point of control. These red lines, again, are virgin point of controls where a lot of buyers and sellers have previously met up before, but we have not seen price return. That's SQM. And then these other names also saw momentum call buying today. LTHM, which has been like a $19, $20 stock for a while now. LAC got right up to the top of value. This is a $15 stock, so it might be one to kind of watch. You do have that virgin point of control up here at 20. They're certainly not heightened. And then the other group that's been super strong is this rare earths, which again, also a gappy looking chart because a lot of these names also that's in this basket are international. Right, so you're always in a name that has a basket of names that is a lot of international names. It's always going to be gappy price action because as soon as our markets open up at 9:30, right, there's already been a percentage change in names that trade in China because China's market is then closed, right? So if a name that trades in China and is up 2%. Then it has to gap up at that 9:30. Once our markets open, it has to realize what that name did. All right. So, sorry, I'm just reading some headlines about McDonald's, which I jumped out of a position, so I'm sure that name's going to be up. I'm just kidding. Let's just get back to as I got off track a little bit. But MP is a name that I'm watching, and I added a small position. I didn't really want to add a lot of positions here today because we've got a lot of events this week, right? Not only do we have the earnings season, which the banks will report. Remember, the banks don't move that much on earnings traditionally, but you've got the CPI report that comes out tomorrow, a big gauge of inflation that the Fed looks at, as well as on Wednesday, you get the PPI report, and then you get Powell speaking Wednesday and Thursday. So I at this point would be okay with a little bit of volatility just to shake things up like it did last week. There was some really good trading opportunities when we had a little bit of volatility. So I'm kind of positioned a little bit more for that right now. I'm holding some, names that are a little bit conservative, that don't move, that aren't as fast. I've been holding, a little bit of a little bit of this name, Waste Management, right? Not a big mover, but just something to kind of hold some money in. I've been holding a little bit of MDT, Medtronic. Again, it's not a huge mover, but it's definitely moving in the right direction, right? So I've got some names that are a little bit lower equity volatility that are doing pretty decently. Another name that I wanted to talk about today was Restoration Hardware. Notice that this is on the cusp again of breaking out. I would keep an eye on this one the next couple days. If we don't get a lot of crazy number with the CPI, if it comes in as expected, on the screws in terms of expectations, then odds are you probably won't see a lot of volatility. But they are looking for about 0.5% for the month for tomorrow. So that's CPI, and like I said, next day you get PPI, which again, at least they've moved up the numbers. A couple months ago, they were expecting such a low number, right? This is good that they're implying a 0.5% increase. A couple months ago, they were expecting like 0.2, 0.3, and then when the number came in at 0.5, everybody was like, "Oh my God, that's above expectations." And I was like, "Well, why are expectations so low to begin with? We know right now that there is a higher tick of inflation, so this number they should be expecting more." So anyway, we'll see how it turns out for tomorrow. I always show my trade blotter in here, so. Here's this. Again, I did not do a whole bunch of trading today. Just kind of light. Just realized that we might get more of a grind them out type of trade. But this Goldman trade worked really well. I'm out of this trade. Right, I took off this trade. This was a roll. So I had this trade originally in the 375 calls. And I took profits in those and went into the 385 calls and also made some money in there. You could see I reduced some risk in a couple things. I took off my McDonald's trade just again because I just don't want the short-term option exposure right now with all these events this week. I mentioned I put on a Dow trade. That worked. I got my second target in a line. So again, taking targets right now, like in this tape, very important in my opinion, and putting some short-term catalyst trades on like something like this, which I could have taken a target at the end of the day. I chose not to for now because it's not that big of a trade, but there's a trading blotter. So that's it for today's video, guys. Have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.